Welcome to the literary journey. Hello, dear word travelers. Today I invite you to an extraordinary journey through time, where the cold of solitude meets the warmth of hope. This is a story that whispers eternal truths about family, belonging, and how miracles are born in the darkest moments. A Mexican Christmas Eve of 1879 awaits us, where rare snow covers the highlands, and lonely hearts discover that sometimes God sends angels disguised as family. Prepare to meet Doña Esperanza, an abandoned soul who will find her redemption in the generosity of strangers who will become her true family. Tell me, dear listeners, from what corner of our beloved Brazil are you following this narrative? Leave it in the comments. I love getting to know you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that loving like so more people can discover these stories that warm the heart. Historical opening. Year 1879, San Jeronimo Ranch, rural region of Jalisco, Mexico. The tallow candle trembled in its final agony, spilling dancing shadows across the cracked adobe walls of the jacal. Doña Esperanza Morales pressed her rosary between her withered fingers, each bead smooth from decades of whispered prayers. The highland wind whistled through the cracks of the poorly fitted door, bringing with it an unusual cold that announced something extraordinary for that Christmas Eve of 1879. At 67 years old, Esperanza had learned the silent language of solitude. Her heart, which once sheltered the entire family like a welcoming brazier, was now merely warm ashes of memories that insisted on resisting time. Vicente, her husband, had been sleeping for 15 years in the sacred grounds of San Jeronimo Cemetery, victim of stray bullets from the War of the 3 Years. Aurelio, her only son, had departed 5 long years ago toward the mines of Zacatecas, promising to return rich and prosperous, but the road seemed to have swallowed both his footprints and his letters. The image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, hanging on the main wall, watched her with maternal eyes that seemed to understand each unshed tear. Esperanza whispered one more Hail Mary, asking not for wealth or lost youth, but merely that death would not come to find her in that solitude that grew like weeds between the mesquite beams. The cold intensified strangely, and for the first time in her nearly 7 decades, Esperanza saw white flakes dancing beyond the fogged window. Snow on the Mexican highlands, an omen that made her blood quicken with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Something different was about to happen on that holy night. The sound of hooves on hardened earth broke the sepulchral silence that enveloped the abandoned property. Esperanza rose from her wooden cot, her body protesting against the sudden movements, and peered through the fogged window. A man mounted on a dappled horse was approaching slowly, followed by a gentle mule, carrying 2 small figures wrapped in colorful rebozos. Esteban Herrera, a 35-year-old cowboy with hands calloused from daily work with Criollo cattle, was leading his daughters through the cold night. Carmen, 8 years old, clutched a small guitar against her chest, while Soledad, 6, held a wicker basket that exhaled celestial aromas, freshly made tamales, golden buñuelos, and chocolate atole prepared by the ranch comadres. "Good evening, Doña Esperanza," called Esteban, his voice carrying the natural respect of men of the land. "The girls didn't want you to spend Christmas Eve alone." Carmen jumped from the mule with the agility of a heron, her black eyes shining with the innocent mischief of childhood. Soledad descended more cautiously, but soon ran to embrace Esperanza's frail legs with the absolute confidence of someone who had already chosen where to place her affection. "Grandma of the heart," whispered Soledad, using the endearing term she had invented for the woman they treated as grandmother since they first encountered her, months before, buying corn in the San Jeronimo market. Esperanza's chest contracted. It had been so long since anyone called her by a name that carried affection. Tears threatened to spring forth, but she contained them, allowing herself only a timid smile that completely transformed her time-marked face. Esteban watched the scene with eyes that also knew solitude. Widowed since Soledad's difficult birth, he had raised the girls alone, teaching them that family wasn't limited solely to shared blood. That night, 3 lonely hearts began to weave the first threads of an unexpected belonging. The humble jacal transformed into a sanctuary of aromas and muffled laughter. Carmen spread over the rough wooden table an embroidered rebozo that had belonged to her mother, while Soledad distributed the delicacies with the seriousness of a small hostess. Esperanza, with hands trembling with emotion, warmed the corn tortillas on her clay comal, the familiar sizzling resonating like forgotten music in her memory. The chocolate atole steamed in the clay pot, beaten to perfection with the wooden molinillo that Esteban had brought, Esperanza raised the cup to her lips and closed her eyes. She hadn't tasted hot chocolate in 2 years, since her meager savings barely covered beans and corn flour. The sweet flavor exploded in her mouth like a childhood embrace, awakening memories of Christmas Eves when Vicente still laughed loudly and Aurelio ran through the house chasing chickens. "Tell us about your youth, Grandma," asked Carmen, tuning the strings of the small guitar. The polished wood gleamed in the golden candlelight, and her nimble little hands already knew simple chords that her mother had taught her before departing to the eternal arms of the Virgin. "There was a time," began Esperanza, her voice gaining strength as the words flowed, "when this house was filled with the sound of looms and songs. My mother wove the most beautiful rebozos in all of Jalisco, and my father planted corn that grew as high as the heavens." Soledad approached, resting her head on Esperanza's fragile shoulder. "Sing with us, Grandma. Carmen knows a very beautiful song." Carmen's fingers danced across the strings, and a soft melody filled the cold air. Esperanza recognized the ancient lullaby that her own grandmother had sung to her decades before. Her voice, hoarse from disuse, timidly joined the improvised choir, and for the first time in years the jacal vibrated with true life. Esteban watched in silence, slowly chewing the refried beans, savoring not only the food, but the simple miracle of not being alone on that sacred night. The chocolate slowly cooled, but hearts warmed with each shared word. Carmen's natural curiosity didn't take long to overcome respectful shyness. Seated on the packed earth floor with legs crossed like a little Indian, she tilted her head and asked with the disarming frankness of 8 years, "Grandma, where is your real family? Don't you have children who come to visit you?" The silence that followed was as dense as the chocolate cooling in the pot. Esperanza lowered her eyes to her intertwined hands, where her wedding ring still gleamed, worn by time but faithful in its post. Esteban made a motion to scold his daughter for the indiscreet question, but Esperanza raised a trembling hand, asking permission to answer. "I have a son named Aurelio," she said, her voice gaining a distant quality, as if speaking of someone who had existed only in dreams. "He left 5 years ago for the mines of Zacatecas, promising to return rich to care for his aging mother. But the mountains, sometimes they swallow our men and never return them." Soledad, still resting against her shoulder, raised her large dark eyes. "Maybe he's lost, Grandma. Papa says that sometimes men get lost not on roads, but in their own hearts." The childish wisdom cut deeper than any blade. Esperanza felt tears flowing freely down her furrowed cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, from someone who could finally share the weight she had carried alone for so long. "Well, now you have a new family, Grandma," declared Carmen with the absolute authority of childhood. "We're not going to get lost. Right, Papa?" Esteban nodded solemnly. "Next year's posadas will be here, Doña Esperanza, and Candlemas too. A house without laughter is just a pile of adobe and wood." Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall more densely, as if heaven itself wanted to seal that promise with its white and silent blessing. But nature held an even greater test to prove the strength of those new bonds. The snowstorm intensified with a fury that the Mexican highlands rarely knew. The wind howled through the distant mountains, carrying with it a load of ice that transformed the familiar landscape into unknown territory. Inside the jacal, the mesquite beams began to groan under the unusual weight of snow accumulating on the roof of tiles and adobe. Esteban stood up abruptly, all the instincts of a man of the land alert. He knew the signs. He had seen similar constructions give way during rare storms, when nature decided to remind men of their smallness. The adobe walls, built decades before to resist scorching sun and occasional rains, weren't made to support the white weight, falling from the sky like vengeance of ancient gods. "We need to get out of here," he murmured. But before he could explain, a dry crack echoed above their heads. A main beam arched dangerously, and small clods of mud began to fall like tears from the wounded structure. Carmen grabbed Esperanza's arm, her eyes wide with fright. Soledad began to whimper, but tried to be brave as her father had taught her. Esperanza looked around the only home she had known in adult life, the walls that sheltered her marriage, Aurelio's birth, the vigil nights when Vicente died, the lonely years of waiting. "Our Father, who art in heaven," she began to pray in a low voice, and the children joined their childish voices to the ancestral prayer. Esteban joined the improvised chorus, but his eyes remained fixed on the ceiling that groaned like a wounded animal. Another crack, stronger, followed by the sound of sliding tiles. The snow had found a crack and began to penetrate, forming small frozen puddles on the packed earth floor. The jackal that had resisted decades of storms finally found its limit. "Mothers of families," whispered Esteban, using the respectful expression that cowboys employed for brave women, "the time has come to seek safe shelter." The house that held a lifetime of memories was about to collapse, but something much more precious was being built at that moment. The final crash came like dry thunder in the dawn. The main beam gave way completely, dragging with it a cascade of adobe, tiles, and memories. Esteban didn't hesitate. He lifted Carmen onto his strong shoulders, took Soledad in his left arm, and extended his right hand toward Esperanza. "Come, Doña, life isn't over yet." The blizzard lashed their faces when they emerged from the smoking debris. The snow fell so dense they could barely see 2 meters ahead, but Esteban knew every stone of those lands. He guided the small group through the storm, his firm steps cutting through snow that already covered previous footprints. Esperanza looked back only once. The jackal that had sheltered 3 generations of her family was now merely a pile of rubble under the relentless white mantle. Her image of the Virgin of Guadalupe lay buried under the adobe that once protected her prayers. Everything she possessed in the world had disappeared in a matter of minutes, but Esteban's calloused hand remained firm in hers, and Carmen's nervous laughter cut through the cold like a promise that not everything was lost. The stable rose ahead like a fortress of dark wood, built with more robust techniques to protect valuable animals. Its thick oak beams and double walls offered safe refuge against any storm. The smell of dried alfalfa and well-cured leather received them like a familiar embrace. "Houses can be rebuilt, Doña," said Esteban, helping her sit on a bale of straw. "But souls like yours are unique in all the world." Carmen and Soledad cuddled one on each side of Esperanza, their small hands warming those of the woman they already considered their grandmother of the heart. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the improvised stable, a new family had just been born from the ashes of a destroyed house. Among hay bales and the warmth of horses, a proposal that would change everything was about to be made. Dawn brought a strange silence, the kind of quietude that only snow can impose on the world. The stable awakened gradually, with horses nickering softly, and the golden light of dawn filtering through the wood's cracks. Esperanza had slept leaning against the wall, with Soledad nestled in her lap like a kitten seeking warmth. Esteban stirred the improvised brazier he had maintained during the night, reviving the flames that would drive away the morning cold. Carmen yawned, but her eyes already shone with childhood's renewed energy. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed world outside. "Doña Esperanza," said Esteban, his voice laden with a solemnity that the children recognized as a sign of important conversation. "I have a proposal for you." Esperanza straightened up, still holding Soledad, who was beginning to wake. The golden morning light revealed the night's ravages. Her grayish hair had completely escaped its bun, her cotton dress was stained with mud and straw, but her eyes maintained the serene dignity that no storm had managed to break. "My ranch needs a grandmother for these girls," continued Esteban, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Not out of charity, Doña, but because some souls were born to care and these girls were born to be cared for. Do you accept coming to live with us as part of our family?" Carmen jumped from where she was, her little hands clapping with enthusiasm. "Yes, Grandma. You can teach me to make rebozos like Mama did, and you can tell us more stories. And I want to learn your ancient prayers," added Soledad, now fully awake. "The ones that make God listen better." Esperanza looked at each hopeful little face, then at the honest man who offered not just a roof, but a place in the world where her existence would have meaning again. Tears came free and transparent, like the snow melting on the stable roof. "I accept," she whispered, and the word resonated in the stable like a church bell announcing a miracle. The sun rose over a snow-covered world, but also over hearts warmed by the certainty that sometimes God really does send angels disguised as family. The days that followed Christmas Eve transformed into a delicate dance of adaptation. Esteban's ranch, with its thick walls of well-built adobe and roof of robust beams, now sheltered 4 souls, learning to breathe in the same rhythm. Esperanza settled in the small room that previously served as a pantry, but which Carmen and Soledad decorated with dried wildflowers and drawings made with charcoal on the whitewashed walls. Mornings began early, with the rooster's crow and the distant lowing of Criollo cattle. Esperanza woke before everyone, a habit rooted in decades of caring for house and family. She lit the kitchen brazier, prepared tortillas for breakfast, and strained the strong coffee that Esteban appreciated before departing for his daily labor. "Good morning, Grandma," Carmen would whisper, still with disheveled hair and sleepy eyes, embracing Esperanza's waist as a morning ritual. Soledad wouldn't delay in appearing, dragging her rag doll that Esteban had carved on a previous winter afternoon. The first great lesson came when Carmen asked to learn to weave. Esperanza sat with the girl in the inner patio, where morning light warmed the irregular stones. Her fingers, once agile with threads and weft, trembled slightly with age, but memory remained intact. "The rebozo isn't just fabric, mija," she explained patiently, guiding Carmen's inexperienced little hands. "It's a woman's story passed from mother to daughter. Each thread carries the tears and joys of whoever weaves it." Soledad watched, fascinated, asking questions with the infinite curiosity of 6 years. "Why do the tears stay in the rebozo, Grandma? Don't they dry?" "Some tears become blessings, my love," responded Esperanza, thinking of all the nights she had cried alone in her destroyed jacal. "And blessings never dry. They only transform into strength for whoever needs it." But not all adaptations would be smooth, and the first great tension was about to emerge. The letter arrived on a March afternoon, when the last snows melted and formed crystalline streams among the patio stones. The postman, a thin man who knew all the highland paths, delivered the yellowed envelope to Esteban with the solemn expression of one carrying important news. Esperanza recognized the handwriting immediately. The angular strokes she herself had taught Aurelio as a child, now firmer, but still carrying the leftward inclination that had always characterized him. Her hands trembled as she opened the seal, and Carmen approached instinctively, as if sensing the emotional storm approaching. "Dear Mother, I found work at a foundry in Guanajuato. I'll be back for next Christmas with enough money to build you a new house. Your son who never forgot you, Aurelio." The words seemed to dance on the yellowed paper. Carmen watched Esperanza's face transform slowly, as if a different person were emerging from within that woman she had learned to love as grandmother. Soledad, playing with her rag doll on the floor, noticed the sudden silence and raised curious eyes. It's from Aurelio," whispered Esperanza, and her voice carried a strange mixture of joy and panic. "My son, he's alive. He's going to return for next Christmas." Esteban approached slowly, reading over Esperanza's shoulder. He immediately understood the dilemma forming like a stormy cloud on the horizon. Carmen, with the sharp insight of 8 years, caught the subtext even before the adults. "Does that mean Grandma is going to leave?" she asked, her small voice breaking at the end of the sentence. The silence that followed was denser than any snowfall. Esperanza looked at the 2 girls who had become her granddaughters of the heart, then at the man who had offered her a family when she had lost all hope. The paper trembled in her hands like a leaf in the wind. I don't know, mijas," she admitted, and for the first time since Christmas Eve her voice carried uncertainty. "Aurelio is my blood son, but you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Carmen ran to her arms, immediately followed by Soledad. The 3 embraced in the middle of the silent kitchen, while Esteban watched with his heart divided between joy for the recovery of Esperanza's lost son and fear of losing the woman who had brought completeness to his fragmented family. The promise of Christmas was still distant, but the ghost of an impossible choice began to haunt the ranch. The months that followed Aurelio's letter transformed into a strange suspension of time. Esperanza continued her daily routines, waking before dawn, preparing warm tortillas, teaching Carmen to weave rebozos, telling ancient stories to Soledad, but a shadow of worry hung over her gestures like a persistent cloud. Carmen, with childhood's sharp sensitivity, perceived every hesitant pause, every distant look that Esperanza cast toward the mountains where Aurelio would eventually appear. The girl became more affectionate, as if trying to tie the grandmother of the heart with invisible threads of affection. "Grandma," she said one afternoon, while watching Esperanza hang clothes on the line, "do you love your blood son more than us?" The question hit Esperanza like a stone thrown in a tranquil lake. She stopped hanging Esteban's shirt and looked at Carmen, searching for words that wouldn't hurt but would be true. "Love isn't like a tortilla, mija," she finally responded. "It doesn't diminish when divided, it grows, but sometimes ancient obligations speak louder than the new heart." Soledad, who was playing nearby with sticks and pebbles, looked up. "Are ancient obligations like ghosts, Grandma?" The childish comparison carried more wisdom than Soledad could understand. Esperanza sat heavily on the wooden stool that Esteban had made for her, the weight of 50 years of traditional motherhood pressing her curved shoulders. Sometimes yes, my love. Sometimes the ghosts of the past don't let us live the present as we want. That night, Esteban found Esperanza sitting in the patio, contemplating stars that shone like seeds of light in the dark sky. He approached silently, respecting the moment of reflection, but offering his supportive presence. "Do you know what hurts me most?" whispered Esperanza without taking her eyes from the sky. "It's not choosing between Aurelio and you. It's discovering that perhaps I've lived alone so long that I forgot how to love without fear of losing." Esteban sat beside her, his calloused hands crossed over his knees. "Fear is part of love, Doña Esperanza. Those who love without fear love little." The stars continued to shine, indifferent to human dilemmas, while Christmas approached like inevitable destiny. September brought the first post-summer rains and news that quickened the whole family's heart. The postman returned, this time carrying not just a letter, but information gathered in San Geronimo taverns. Aurelio Morales had been seen in Guadalajara, buying supplies and asking about the path to the ranch where his mother was born. "He'll be here before the Day of the Dead," informed the postman, accepting the hot coffee that Esperanza offered him. "They say he's well dressed with money in his pocket and talking about building a big house for you." Carmen listened to everything from the kitchen corner, pretending to occupy herself with her sewing, but recording every word as if it were sacred scripture. Soledad, less subtle, approached Esperanza and held her hand with possessive force. "When he arrives, is Grandma really going to leave?" asked Soledad, her dark eyes shining with contained tears. Esperanza knelt to the girl's height, her own tears threatening to overflow. "I don't know, my love. Honestly, I don't know what to do." Esteban watched the scene from the door threshold, his heart divided between understanding and silent desperation. He understood the force of family obligations. He himself would never abandon Carmen and Soledad, regardless of circumstances. But he despaired at the idea of returning to solitude, of seeing the girls lose the maternal figure they so loved. "Maybe," he said, his voice careful like one walking on thin ice, "maybe when Aurelio arrives, we can talk, explain how things worked out here." "He is my blood son," repeated Esperanza, but the phrase sounded more like an attempt to convince herself than an assertion of certainty. "He spent 5 years working to return and care for his mother. How can I say I found another family?" Carmen dropped her sewing and ran to embrace Esperanza. "But we found you first, and you taught us that family isn't just blood." The childish wisdom echoed in the kitchen silence like a church bell. Esperanza embraced Carmen, then extended an arm toward Soledad, forming a nest of affection that seemed more solid than any adobe house. "Come here," called Esteban, and when the three turned toward him, he saw in their faces the same expression of those who face storms, fear mixed with determination to resist together. Autumn advanced inexorably, and with it, the hour of truth approached, like a solitary rider on the horizon. November arrived laden with palpable tension. The poplar leaves trembled yellow in the cold wind, and Esperanza found herself divided between anxious expectation of seeing Aurelio again and dread of hurting the children who had become the center of her universe. Carmen had become silent, losing part of the natural joy that had always characterized her. Soledad followed Esperanza like a shadow, as if fearing she might disappear if not constantly watched. Esteban tried to maintain normalcy, but his words carried extra weight, each conversation seeming like a possible farewell. During morning work, while milking cows and feeding horses, he and Esperanza talked about simple matters, the weather, animals, preparations for winter, but both felt the presence of the unspoken floating between them like a persistent ghost. "Doña Esperanza," he said one afternoon while repairing a broken fence, "whatever decision you make, I want you to know, these months were the best since Maria left." The girls truly smiled again. Esperanza stopped holding the wire and looked at him directly. "For me too, Esteban. You gave me back reasons to wake each morning. Then why does it seem you're saying goodbye?" The direct question made Esperanza lower her eyes. Her hands, now less trembling after months of adequate nutrition and affection, gripped the wire with unnecessary force. "Because a mother doesn't abandon her son, no matter how many years have passed. Aurelio sacrificed 5 years of his youth working in the mines to return and care for me. How can I look in his eyes and say I no longer need him? And how can you look in Carmen and Soledad's eyes and say they don't need you?" The dilemma remained suspended between them like a broken bridge that neither knew how to cross. That night, Carmen approached Esperanza at bedtime carrying the small guitar that had belonged to her mother. "Grandma, I want to sing you a song," she said, her voice small but determined. So you'll remember us, no matter where you are. The melody that followed was simple and sweet, a lullaby that Maria had sung to the girls, and which Carmen now offered as gift and promise. Esperanza listened with tears silently running down her cheeks, knowing that music would follow her wherever destiny might lead. December was approaching, and with it the Christmas Eve that would forever define the course of that unlikely family. December arrived with cutting winds that whispered promises and threats. On the 15th day, while Esperanza combed Soledad's hair in the inner patio, a solitary rider appeared on the horizon. The silhouette was familiar even at a distance, the broad shoulders inherited from his father, the erect posture characteristic of the Morales, the particular way of riding that Vicente had taught his son decades before. "Aurelio," whispered Esperanza, and the word escaped her lips like prayer and lament. Carmen and Soledad ran toward her, instinctively forming a united group. Esteban emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on his shirt, his eyes fixed on the visitor approaching slowly, as if he too feared that decisive encounter. Aurelio Morales dismounted with elegance, revealing a well-nourished 42-year-old man, wearing good quality clothes and carrying in his eyes the iron determination of one who had worked 5 years with a single objective. His face, marked by mountain sun but still handsome, lit up upon seeing his mother. "My mother!" he exclaimed, running to embrace her. "Finally, I searched everywhere until a merchant told me I'd find you here." The embrace was long and genuine, loaded with 5 years of longing and regret. Esperanza responded with all the strength her frail body allowed, inhaling her son's scent, different now, mixed with aromas of distant places and hard work, but still recognizable as part of her. "My dear son," she murmured against his chest. "So many nights I prayed for this moment." Aurelio stepped back slightly to observe his mother's face, noting the deeper wrinkles, the completely grey hair, but also something new in her eyes, a piece he didn't remember having seen before. "Mother, I brought enough money to build us a big house in San Geronimo. There's a perfect lot near the plaza, where you can go to Mass every day and have neighbors to talk with." Only then did Aurelio really notice the scene around him. Esteban watching respectfully at a distance, the two girls clinging to Esperanza's skirts, as if fearing she might be torn from them at any moment. His expression gradually changed from joy to confusion. "Who are these people, mother?" Esperanza looked at Carmen and Soledad, then at Esteban, finally back at Aurelio. The moment she had feared for months had finally arrived, and she discovered she had more courage than she imagined. "They are my family, Aurelio. The family I found when I thought I would die alone." The silence that followed carried the weight of a decision that would forever change everyone present's destiny. Esperanza's words resonated in the patio like a church bell announcing inevitable truth. Aurelio looked again at the girls clinging to his mother, at the honest man who awaited respectfully for the situation to unfold, and finally understood the magnitude of what he had found. "Family," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "But mother, I am your son. I worked 5 years to care for your mother," interrupted Esperanza gently, "and that's what you did, my son. Even from a distance, God used your sacrifice to guide me to those who needed my affection." Carmen released herself from Esperanza's skirts and took a brave step toward Aurelio. "You are Grandma's lost son," she said, with the typical frankness of 8 years. "We took care of her when you couldn't. Now you can help." The childish simplicity hit Aurelio like a revelation. He observed more carefully the two girls, Carmen with her intelligent eyes and iron determination, Soledad with her shy but decided sweetness. He saw how they positioned themselves protectively near his mother, not out of possessiveness, but from genuine love. Esteban approached slowly, removing his hat in a sign of respect. "Señor Aurelio, your mother brought light to our house when we were lost in darkness. If you want her back, we understand. But if you want to know the family she built here—" "Built a family," murmured Aurelio, and for the first time his voice carried understanding instead of confusion. "Mother, you're not alone. No, my son, and you don't need to be either." Soledad, gathering all her 6-year-old courage, approached Aurelio and extended her small hand. "Do you want to stay for dinner? Grandma makes the best tortillas in the world." The simple gesture broke Aurelio's last resistances. He knelt to the girl's height and took her hand delicately. "I would like that very much, little one." "Then it's decided," declared Esperanza, her voice gaining the natural authority of matriarchs. "The house you want to build in San Geronimo We'll be big enough for everyone. Carmen and Soledad need education in the city, and Esteban can expand his business. Everyone? Asked Aurelio, slowly standing up. Family doesn't divide. It multiplies, responded Esperanza. You learned that by working 5 years to return to your mother. Now it's time to learn that a mother can have more than one son, and a son can have more than one family. Carmen ran to hug Aurelio around the legs. Welcome, big brother. Now we're a complete family. Soledad joined the embrace, followed by Esperanza. Esteban approached hesitantly, but Aurelio extended his hand in a gesture of brotherhood. The circle closed in the silent patio, under the December sky that began to drop the first flakes of a new snowfall. It seems we're going to have another miraculous Christmas Eve, said Esteban, smiling. Not miraculous, corrected Esperanza, looking at each beloved face around her. Natural, because sometimes what seems lost was just waiting for the right moment to be found. The snow began to fall more densely, covering the world with its white promise of renewal. But this time there were no fragile jackals to collapse, only strong hearts united by the understanding that true family isn't born from blood, but from love that chooses to grow even in the most adverse circumstances. And when the bell of San Geronimo rang in the distance announcing the arrival of Christmas Eve, 6 voices united in an ancient song that spoke of shepherds, stars, and miracles that happen when the human heart opens to receive the unexpected. Because in the end, they all discovered that no matter how many winters life brings us, there will always be a spring waiting on the other side, especially for those who learn that loving is the only wealth that multiplies when shared.